All right, friends, here we are. We are going to be doing a roundtable discussion. We've got our good friend Dwayne Smithgall, Kerry Hansberry, and Pastor Dan Arnold, and we're going to be discussing prayer today. So, Dan, I understand you're first up to draw one of these questions we have never seen before. This is all
never seen them.
Just coming right at us.
No idea what's on the other side of these questions.
Bring it.
Okay. Question is, what are the most common misconceptions you find people have about prayer? How would you respond to those misconceptions? Who wants to start?
Yeah, I can go on a big one for that.
Okay.
One of the big ones for me is people have this misconception of prayer that if I do it right, God will act the way I want him to. That somehow there's like a special platform or manipulation or something they can do to like invoke God, like there's a formula to it. That's one of the big ones that I run into all the time.
How would you respond to that misconception, though?
Yeah, for me, I talk a lot about how prayer changes my heart and aligns my will to God's will. It's that Proverbs 3 passage where when we're committing our way to the Lord, we're acknowledging him in all our ways, and then our paths become straight. And it's not God making our paths better, it's our will being aligned to his. So that's one of my big things that I go to.
How about you guys?
Well, what I immediately thought of was people often say, I'm not good at praying out loud or in groups.
Yeah, that's a big one.
And I think that is really common to hear that. I think the thing that I would say in response to that is just do it.
That's good.
The more you do it, the more comfortable you become, and the easier it is to do with others. The other thing I always think of is short is good.
That's good. Yeah.
So if you're uncomfortable praying with others or praying out loud, to just start and then keep it really short and simple. And God is honored by that and loves that. And I think sometimes we think it has to be too eloquent or flowery or beautiful, and we can just get started.
Good.
So.
Did anybody else feel self-conscious about their prayer length immediately? Like I was thinking of all the times I prayed with Kerry in the room and thought, oh man, is she thinking keep it shorter, Paul?
I never thought that.
Okay, thank you.
Never.
Dwayne, how about you?
I think that's good, keeping it short. Think of the Lord's Prayer, that it was instructive, but it wasn't real long. I think the first thing that comes to my mind is we overcomplicate prayer. During my devotions, they quoted Anne Lamott saying, prayer can be as simple as 3 words. Thank you, help, and wow. And that just struck me, that it doesn't need to be complicated.
We read the same devotion.
Are you serious? Cool. The only one I would add, because I think you guys have said good stuff, is similar, but just the idea that prayer, there's a certain formula for how to pray. But yeah, just kind of like you guys said, keep it simple. Prayer is about communication, and even the Lord's Prayer in and of itself I don't think is meant to be recited as just the only prayer, but as a template, if you will, to how we could pray in relationship to God. So keep it simple. It's all about relationship. Okay, next question.
Oh, Kerry.
What are your personal prayer habits like? What works? What do you find challenging?
Okay, I'll go. Personal prayer habits. And for me, this change has always changed. My personality is one I can get very habitual or in a pattern, and I can get really legalistic quick. So I try not to be too rigid on my habits and patterns. So, for example, I try to start every day in some version of prayer, but that looks different. That could be going to my knees first thing while I'm making coffee. It could also be going out on a walk or a bike ride, praying then. I try to have prayer be really conversational. And so those are a couple. Another thing is sometimes when I'm driving, I'll turn off the radio and just have some time to pray. Another one.
Don't close your eyes.
Another one when
But if his eyes are open, he'll be sinning. So what are we going to do?
that goes back to misconceptions.
Oh, is that one of
That
them?
is a misconception. So I don't know. I've lost my train of thought. So somebody else go. Maybe I'll think of some other personal thoughts. Someone else.
Yeah, for me, some similarities, but it's usually more dynamic than regimented. That's kind of how I feel. I don't like things that feel like I'm just doing it because it's rote. And so a lot of my prayer life tends to be either spur of the moment or I love doing walks and hikes and getting out and moving. I find a lot of my prayer life is also almost like a running commentary where God and I are having a conversation and I'm experiencing things and I'm talking to people and I'm trying to like stay engaged with God through conversations or as I'm going about my daily work or as, I'm studying or even as I'm doing email, just trying to keep it constant as I can. Practicing the Presence by Brother Lawrence is this old monk who was a dishwasher and didn't like it. And he wrote this, he became, this like sought after kind of wise figure. And he talked about prayer. And the book is actually really, really boring. The concept of the book really connected with me. And so I really try to have to be running along constantly with prayer. And then I would also say for big moments, like a crisis or when a friend is sick or when somebody's hurting, and in one of those spaces, that's more when I'm on my knees in prayer type of thing, where I just feel like I need to do some physical sign of surrender so that God's will be done and not my will be done.
Good. You guys.
I think for me, again, Kerry and I use the same app, but I love beginning every day, Lectio 365.
Thank you. Okay, you have to clarify which app it is.
And every day usually starts a day, 10 to 12 minutes. And that has just been really sweet for me with scripture and with prayer. And I would say part of that is just my own prayer afterwards. One of the things I pray every day, God, please give me wisdom, fill me with your spirit, help me to walk in your spirit, live out the fruits of your spirit. That's just a daily prayer that Tim Owen taught me years ago.
Cool.
And I think it's powerful. Even at the end of the day, I would say it's harder to do the one at night because I'm tired, but that one seems really important for me. There's a time of just reflecting where you see God active in your day and just having that time to think about that and thank God because he is, if we pay attention to it. I think a huge part of that too, every night there's a time for confession and then really giving the worries of the day over to God. And there's just something that's been really powerful for me, especially over the last couple of years. Just it settles my mind so that I'm able to rest well at night, knowing that it'll be waiting for me in the morning. Yeah. So, and I think throughout the day, I feel like it's just like you guys, just an open dialogue. I feel like I'm praying throughout the day. In any given day, there's all sorts of stuff going on. Especially as I'm connecting with people who are hurting. So to be able to intercede on their behalf and just ask God to ask him to meet them where they're at in that moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I think my personal prayer habits have changed a lot over the years. I think coming to faith as an adult and not having that childhood church background at all. And I think I felt initially as a Christ follower that I needed to understand the right way to pray. Mm-hmm. And if I could just kind of that prescriptive idea that if I could just figure out the elements, then I'd be doing it right. But I think over the years, I've learned there are lots of different right ways to pray, and that can look different in different seasons of your life. Even at different times of the day, I am a big fan of journaling and just writing out my prayers. I went through a few years ago a time where I felt like it was really important for me to express more gratitude and to really name the things that I saw in my life daily that were good and to thank God for those things. So for about 5 years, I wrote down 3 things every morning that I was thankful for. And sometimes they were big and spiritual, and sometimes they were this cup of coffee that I'm holding. So that has been a specific thing. I think, like you expressed, the app and just kind of something that helps you with prompting you to prayer is great. There was one other thing I was going to say, but I've forgotten what it is.
Well, and even maybe to buy you more time, one of the things that hits me hearing the two of you is just how at different seasons, different types of prayer and different habits are relevant to us. And I think for me, there was a time that Lectio 365, that app I was in every day. There's a time I've journaled my prayers regularly. There's a time I was using pre-written prayers out of prayer books, and just again, what is most essential to connecting with God in the moment, I think is the invitation. So
Thank you.
did you remember that?
That helped. And so the thing that I have been thinking about for the last few years and has really opened up kind of a new dynamic for me in prayer is centering prayer, and the idea of, rather than prayer being a conversation and an exchange back and forth, or where I'm telling God all the things, all the concerns, and where that's not wrong or bad to do that, but to simply spend time sitting in the presence of God. And that has really changed my prayer life also, to practice and begin to understand what that looks like, and that God looks forward to me coming, not with my own prayer agenda, but simply to be and to spend time with him. So
Yeah, absolutely. I wasn't sure if there's going to be another question coming up along those lines, but
We don't know what they
we
are.
don't know what they are. But that aspect of just being in the presence of God, like anytime you're with God, you're in prayer, right? And so just enjoying that presence, that's a big deal for me as well.
And when Dwayne was talking about the evening prayer, and this, I mean, admittedly, I haven't practiced this one in a while, but I'm feeling convicted just sitting here. The examined prayer. I think Ignatius is the one who created that, but the idea at the end of the day where you pause and you reflect on your day in prayer with God, and inviting him to reveal to you the different places he was present and different. So that's one people should look that up. The examined prayer.
It's really, really good.
So, all right, next question, Dwayne.
All right. Let's see. Whoop. Glasses. How would you describe the state of prayer in the Western church? What are people missing?
The state of prayer in the Western church.
this is a big question.
Yeah, it's massive.
In the Western church. This is a great one. Who wants to go first?
Not it.
I think one of the bigger problems that we're running into goes back to a lot of our misconceptions. My prayer is to get God to do something for me because I need something from God. And while those aren't bad prayers, for a lot of folks, particularly in the Western church, like that's sort of the end to what they think prayer is. And then the slightly more evolved approach might be, and I also listen. And those are, again, really, really important aspects of prayer. But I feel that prayer is the presence of God in my life. It's communion with God. It is engaging with God. And it's to have my heart change. Like that would probably be one of the bigger things that I would say, like, this is a problem that we have. And that's why people are like, oh, I can't do the 3 hours of prayer, or the amazing prayer warriors who pray, all like this. It's like, because you're thinking of talking for 3 hours. You're not thinking of being with somebody, like when you get home, end of the day, you're tired, and you can just sit on the couch with your spouse and you don't have to say a thing, but that makes you feel connected with them. And it reminds you of your love, right? And that can be the same with God, but we don't really run into that territory as much.
This question makes me nervous, so I want to be careful, but I'm hearing what you're saying. Again, when we talk about prayer, I think we're talking about prayer as relationship, we've already talked about, and we're talking about prayer as, I would say, prayer as an expression of our dependence on God. And so when I think of the Western church, I think of how significantly have we put relationship with God in the forefront of as far as a priority for us in the church? And I also think, how significantly are we dependent on God in how we function as a church? So those are the questions that come to my mind. And so I would suggest that in general, broad strokes, and broad strokes, we as a Western church maybe are not the best at prioritizing prayer, because, again, speaking critically, I think for seasons, the Western church has been really self-sufficient. Really, we can do this. We can just bootstrap it. We've got the energy. Again, broad strokes, gross generalizations. That is not true of every church.
Right.
So I would say we have not always been as dependent on God as we need to be. And again, kind of, I think what I do hear Paul saying there, just prioritizing what is the purpose of the church. And I do think one of those purposes is to bring God's people into intimacy with God. So I don't want to criticize the Western church, but I think there is a lot of opportunity for us to grow in this area. I don't know. This was a big question.
Well, I think what comes to my mind when you say that is the CMA denomination's phrasing of the primary work of God's people is prayer. And so I guess it could be turned around to a question and ask, when we look at our church, whatever church we're talking about, is that our primary work? And do we look at that as followers of Jesus as our primary work?
That's a great question. Yeah, that should be one of our big questions. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking the same. Another thing I was thinking of, I think, especially just coming out of the last few years, there's just been so much stuff going on. And I think what we struggle with is we don't feel like we can be honest with God with our disappointment. So instead of being honest and real, which I think that's why I love the Psalms so much, or Lamentations, that he invites that. And I think until you can really pour out your heart to God and be honest with him, we miss his embrace.
That's good. Yeah.
But so I think in some ways, maybe we've just given up. That instead of sharing my disappointment with God, because I don't feel like I should feel that way towards God, it would just be better not to pray. Or that I did pray and he didn't answer.
Yeah.
And so feeling anger towards God and being able to process that. And again, we have a big God. He already knows what we think. He can handle our pain. As I was told as a young man, that it's okay to beat on his chest. He can handle it. And
maybe, do you think, I'm just thinking of, God didn't answer our prayer. Well, he didn't answer our prayer in the way that we wanted him to. And that yes is an answer, no is an answer, and not yet is an answer. And for all of us, we want the yes, because we prayed the prayer because we thought we knew the thing. And so sitting with that no or that not yet can be hard.
Yeah. I think in James chapter 4, it talks about, I'm always intrigued how we don't receive things from God because we don't ask.
Right.
In fact, someone shared that it'll be interesting someday when we get to heaven and presented it like unwrapped gifts that we never got to enjoy because we didn't ask. But also in James 4, it also talks about, it cautions us asking with the right motives. That a lot of times we come to God and treat him as a vending machine. And that's where our disappointment is, that we turn to him in prayer when we want or need something. And again, going back to the Lord's Prayer, it was very instructive. Your will be done, not mine. And I think in my own life, and I think as we mature in our relationship with Jesus, our prayers really do change. It's less about me and more about his heart for whatever it is we're facing.
Yeah, and I want to circle back to what you were talking about in the Psalms, particularly Psalms of Lament. So that was one of the things I was strongly feeling that, oh, I forgot to say that. And you said it perfectly, that God like already knows what's on your heart and what your emotions are. And then because we feel guilty about talking to God in an informal way, we hold them in, but then God doesn't have a chance to work with them. He knows they're there. He knows what we're saying. He knows what we're feeling. But out of respect for God and misguided respect, we're holding them back. And there are obviously times where we have to hold God in awe and esteem and respect, but man, he can't work on those tough things if we don't give them to him. And if we aren't honest with ourselves with what we're thinking and what we're feeling. So I love that. I think that was really, really great point, Dwayne.
Yeah. It makes me think in Philippians 2, that verse, don't be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And his promise, the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. And I don't think that you can, in fact, I just heard something that was really interesting, that our minds, we don't have the capacity to be anxious and thankful at the same time. They did a study. So I think sometimes it's being honest with God, but coming to that place, and you see it over and over again in the Psalms, it ends with thanksgiving.
Yeah, in that formula. Have you guys ever read Answering God by Eugene Peterson? It's a real small book, and I'll warn you, it's kind of poetical. He takes a little, even in the way he writes, he's explaining something. So if you have like scientific or mathematic friends, like don't recommend this book. I did that once, and I got some backlash. But it's I think the subtitle is Using the Psalms as Tools for Prayer. And he kind of breaks down each of the different types of prayer and then how to talk to God through them. And he has a really great part on laments and looking through that formula of, God, you're amazing and you're all powerful. Here's my problem, but I will, right? I'll come back with thanksgiving. So it's a really good book, and it's really small if you ever have somebody who's wanting to dive into a deeper prayer life through the Psalms.
I heard somebody recently say, too, that one of the challenges we have in the Western church is that we don't have a good theology of grief and suffering, too. And again, when you think of the Psalms, when you think of lament, when you think of God's sovereignty, that's a piece of it, too. All right, Paul, last question.
All right, which one do I pick?
The last one.
What are the biggest obstacles that prevent a healthy prayer life? What are the biggest obstacles that prevent a healthy prayer life?
Committing the time to doing it.
Yeah, my gut reaction was busyness, but yeah.
Yeah, setting that aside, carving that out of our lives, making intentional times, even if it's small at first, a couple minutes, and growing that. But I think for most people that I know, and myself, certainly in my own experience, getting started, being dedicated and devoted to carving that out because we all have a lot of things, good things and not great things, pulling for our attention and our time and our energy. So.
Ruthless Elimination Hurry, another book recommendation.
Yes.
But even as I was reflecting on that too, because again, I would use busyness as my excuse, I would also say a lack of making prayer a priority. Because again, I think as we've all talked at different points today, I think that prayer is something that as we go throughout the day, like we were just quoting a second ago, praying about everything, in everything, it should be a constant part of our life too. So I think when I fail to make that regular that regular priority in my life, that's a choice I make too. So
I think what comes to my mind, there's nothing difficult about praying. There's nothing difficult about reading our Bible, but there's a spiritual battle. And I think for me, it's just getting started. That there's resistance. And a lot of times, I would say most times, if I'm being honest, I don't always feel like I want to pray. And it's just getting started that you break that barrier, and then it seems easy. So the enemy knows that those are our two greatest weapons. And so naturally we should expect some kind of opposition or things that'll be a barrier. I would say even too, when I enter into prayer, my mind's every morning, I always have a pad of paper because my minds are flooded with thoughts, and to be able to write those things down so I can continue to come back and be focused on God.
That's good. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to say something that may want to be edited out at the end of this.
Juicy.
But I'm just going to go for it anyway.
Okay.
A few years ago, I had the experience of being really frustrated that our church wasn't doing whole church prayer things.
Oh, we can handle this.
And
Leave it in.
I
take it.
wanted that. And I was sort of complaining to myself, and I was complaining to God a little bit about why weren't we doing those kinds of things. And God, in his beautiful, gentle way that he does, said to me, why don't you start a prayer group in your house? You could start it next week. And it was just this, oh my goodness, light bulb moment of, I can absolutely call 5 people I know and ask if they want to join me, and we can start praying together. And it doesn't have to be organized or advertised by anyone else. It can just be something that I do, and it's as easy as that. So, you can get started with something like that too.
And that came out of you praying as you were grumbling and complaining to
Yes,
God, for the
God.
record.
Yes.
Yeah, 2 things kind of came to mind right away for me. One is internal and one is external. The internal one is, and I'm probably the only person that struggles with this, but is pride, where I think I can handle it, or I determine I can handle it, or I forget to rely or depend on God. And so I always, my morning prayer is, God, make me humble. I want to be humble all the time.
Okay, we can help you with that.
Yep, you're always working on me, Dan.
I'm here
So that's a big thing, is when I think I'm in control or that I can handle life or that I'm on top of things, that's when I'm most vulnerable to be missing the connection with God. And so that's one of my big desires in prayer. And then the other one that I both have struggled with, and I've also seen, and this one won't go down very well with younger people, but the phone. The phone gets you. You have extra time, you have extra moment. You could spend it with God, or you can, Candy Crush it. You can scroll. You can check your notifications. You can, whatever it is you do on the phone. It's so difficult to just detach from that thing and be intentional with your time. Yeah. So I had to actually get to the point where I had to have a discipline of like, if I want to pray, I put the phone somewhere else. Or if I want to focus on something, I got to get the phone out of my direct presence, because as soon as it like buzzes, turn off the notification, then it buzzes. And I'm like, oh, what's that? It's probably important, and it's Duolingo letting me know that I've earned enough stars to keep on going.
Oh boy. All right, any others to this one?
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us. Kerry, thanks for coming over from CareNet and spending time with us chatting. And yeah, it's good.
We had fun.
It's my pleasure to be here once I remembered that we were doing this today.